John Bennett had everything a happy marriage, a fulfilling career, and a future that seemed set in stone. For over a decade, he and Lena shared a life built on love, or so he thought. They were the perfect couple, or at least that's how it seemed to everyone else. John was a dedicated husband, the father who always showed up for his family. But beneath the surface, something had started to change. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the connection between him and Lena began to crack. The long conversations they once shared turned into brief, distracted exchanges. The passion that once burned so brightly in their marriage began to flicker and fade. Then one day, John stumbled upon a message on Lena's phone, a single, innocent-looking text that shattered everything. It wasn't the message itself, but the realization that this wasn't the first one. It wasn't even the second. Lena had been carrying on an affair for months, and John had been too blind to see it. The truth hit him like a freight train. He confronted Lena that night, but instead of the tears and apologies he expected, he was met with cold indifference. Lena offered no remorse, only excuses, as if the years they spent together had meant nothing. "You'll come crawling back, begging for forgiveness," she said, her voice icy. Her words hung in the air like a prophecy. Devastated, but no longer the naive man he once was, John walked out of their home, that night his heart heavy, his mind racing. Her final words echoed in his ears. She thought he'd beg, but John knew something she didn't. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far worse. For the first few weeks, John's world felt like it was crumbling. He went through the motions, pretending to be fine, but inside, he was unraveling. The anger didn't come immediately. First, there was the numbness. He had spent years loving Lena, giving her everything, and in return, she had destroyed him. He thought he knew her, but it turned out he didn't know anything at all. The betrayal hit him in ways he never anticipated, like a slow burn, deep in his chest, eating away at everything he thought he knew about their life together. John spent hours at work, pouring himself into projects as a way to avoid confronting the emotional wreckage. But when he was alone, the anger would creep in quiet at first, then building into something more dangerous. He would replay her cold words over and over in his head. "You'll come crawling back, begging for forgiveness." The sting of her certainty, the way she dismissed him without hesitation, made his blood boil. Then came the turning point. He called his old friend Mark, someone who knew him well enough to cut through the fog of his emotions. Mark listened patiently as John vented, then said something that would change everything. "You deserve better than this, man. You owe her nothing. You owe yourself everything." Those words struck John like a lightning bolt. He had spent his entire life trying to please Lena, making her his world, but she hadn't returned the favor. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about reclaiming his life, his dignity, and his sense of self. He wasn't going to crawl back to her like she expected. No, John would rise from this stronger, colder, and more determined than ever. His desire for revenge began to take root, but it wasn't just about paying her back. It was about taking control of his life once more. He would show her, not with anger, but with action. John had no intention of begging. Instead, he would rebuild himself better, smarter, and more ruthless than she ever thought he could be. And once he had done that, he'd let her see the man she thought she knew wasn't even close to the person he was becoming. Months had passed since the night John left their home, his heart still nursing the wounds of betrayal, but his spirit no longer shattered. He'd spent that time rebuilding not just his career and body, but his entire sense of self. Every day was a step further away from the man who had begged for Lena's love. He was stronger now, more confident, and, most importantly, he was free. It was an ordinary afternoon when John ran into Lena again, of all places, at a cafe he'd started frequenting for his afternoon coffee. He'd barely noticed her at first, but then there she was, standing by the counter, scanning the room for an empty table. Her eyes locked with his, and the recognition was instantaneous. She froze for a moment then, as if catching herself, her lips curled into a smile. It was the same smile she used when she knew she had the upper hand, confident, even smug. She approached him casually, like nothing had changed, as though their last conversation hadn't been one of finality, as if he hadn't walked out of their life forever. "You look different," Lena said, her voice laced with that familiar sense of superiority. She took a sip from her coffee, clearly expecting him to crumble or show even the slightest sign of vulnerability. "I didn't expect to see you here. I bet you've been thinking about me, huh?" John didn't flinch. He looked her in the eye and gave her a calm, almost amused smile. "I'm not the man you left, Lena," he said, his voice steady, betraying no hint of emotion. "I've moved on, just like you have." Her face faltered for a moment, as if trying to process the man standing before her. It was a short encounter, but it was everything John needed to see. She no longer had power over him, and for the first time in months, he felt truly free. After that brief encounter, something inside John clicked. He was no longer the man who once begged for Lena's forgiveness. He was something else now, someone better, stronger, someone who wouldn't just let her walk away scot-free. But his revenge wasn't going to be loud or dramatic. It would be quiet, calculated, and precise. He wouldn't stoop to the level of petty arguments or public outbursts. No, he would hit her where it hurt the most. Her reputation, her career, and her pride. John knew he had to get his life in order before he could truly show Lena the consequences of her actions. He wasn't going to be the broken man she left behind. He was going to be someone so unrecognizable, so much better than she ever imagined, that it would be impossible for her to ignore. He threw himself into his work with single-minded determination, quickly securing a promotion at the company, a position Lena had once dismissed as impossible for someone like him. His rise at work wasn't just about success. It was a symbol, a glaring reminder of what he was capable of how much she had underestimated him. But John's revenge wasn't just about his own success. He began to subtly dismantle Lena's life from the shadows. Using his new professional connections, he started planting seeds of doubt at her workplace. Whispers began to circulate about her affair, and soon her once solid reputation began to crack. He fed little rumors to colleagues who were already questioning her loyalty, ensuring that her colleagues began to distance themselves. Meanwhile, he slowly cut ties with the friends who had sided with Lena during their breakup. They started to see her in a different light. As John's transformation continued, he started dating again not out of need, but out of a desire to reclaim his own identity, to show the world and Lena that he was no longer the man who would accept betrayal. John's life was thriving, but his focus remained on Lena. Her slow descent from the pedestal she'd once sat upon was the only thing that mattered. He watched, with calculated patience, as the consequences of her actions began to unfold. It was all part of the plan, and each small setback for Lena felt like a victory for him. She was losing control, and John was just getting started. The night Lena called was a moment John had been waiting for, though not in the way she expected. Her voice crackled with desperation, raw and unrecognizable. "John, please, I need you. I've lost everything, my job, my friends. I was wrong. I need your help." The words spilled out in a torrent, her usual confident tone replaced by a trembling vulnerability. For a brief moment, John almost felt sorry for her, but that sympathy quickly vanished. This wasn't the woman he'd once loved. This was a broken shell of the person who'd shattered his life, and now she was asking for his mercy. "I was wrong," she repeated, as if those words could somehow undo the damage she caused. John listened, his silence suffocating her pleas. When he spoke, his voice was ice-cold, devoid of the anger he once felt. "You thought I'd come crawling back," he said, his words measured and final. "But I didn't. I'm not the man you left, Lena. I came back to show you what true power looks like." There was no malice in his tone, just the truth. He wasn't angry anymore. He was free. Lena's breath hitched on the other end of the line, the realization settling in. She had underestimated him. John hung up the phone without another word. The sense of closure washed over him. He had shown her exactly what she needed to see. The man she had discarded was no longer hers to control. And that, in the end, was the sweetest revenge. John's life continued to soar in the months after the phone call. His career reached new heights, his social circle grew, and his sense of self was stronger than ever. He was no longer the man who had begged for forgiveness. That version of him was buried deep in the past. The new John was confident, powerful, and completely in control of his future. Lena, on the other hand, found herself sinking further into the ruins of her own making. Her career, once promising, now lay in tatters. Her former friends had distanced themselves, and even those who had stuck by her began to question her integrity. The whispers John had set in motion about her affair became louder, and soon her reputation was all but destroyed. She couldn't escape the consequences of her actions, and no amount of regret could undo the damage. She tried reaching out to John once more, but he didn't respond. He had nothing left to prove. In the end, John realized that his revenge wasn't about making her suffer. It was about reclaiming his life, his dignity, and his peace of mind. He had shown Lena that the man she thought she could walk all over was the one who ultimately walked away, stronger than ever, and that, for him, was the final victory.